and have the camera 50 yards away.
Nice.
It's really, yeah, I'm really excited about it. So, oh, here we go. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm not this disorganized, all right? Really, truly. My body language should not communicate to you any inconsistencies in the quality in which I deliver this show. It's a Friday at 11 o'clock, or shortly thereafter, 11 o'clock. Things change. We adapt. We adjust. I'm your host, Lowell Whiteman of 360 Performance. Some call me Dr. Whiteman. Some call me Coach. I prefer the Coach because Doctor just makes me kind of cringe a little bit. Like, I really did that? Really? Really? Okay. Well, today I say that way because today we're talking about power. And we're talking about the power of women during Women's History Month, and also the choices that women have in securing their power, validating their power, extending their power to others, and the choices they make throughout that whole continuum of stuff. We'll talk about that more. We'll also introduce our guest, Wendy Borman, more formally, but first we're going to talk about what are you grateful for? And for me today, I reflected on this a little bit longer than I normally do. It tends to come to me very quickly, what I'm grateful for, but today I wanted to be very kind of introspective. So my gratitude today is about respect and an honest exchange of creative thought. And that's my nice way of saying, just tell me, just tell me the truth. Just go right at me with it and give it to me so I can understand it. So I'm going to ask Wendy, what are you grateful for?
Well, I'm grateful to be here, so I'll start with that. I'm grateful for the invitation, but I think taking your cue to be more introspective, I will say I am grateful for all the visionary people that have and leaders that have come before you and I.
That is so.
Bring us where we are today.
That has a lot of meaning in a lot of ways, but also very apropos for today's show. And as is typical with how you and I have had conversations in the past, it's such a great segue to the next piece. And I want to ask a question, just kind of in general, not expecting an answer, but about Brittany Griner, a WNBA basketball player who still finds herself in Russia under, I don't know if she's a captive or she's in jail or she's sitting on a beach. I don't know, but Russians have her and are not letting her go. So my question is Brittany Griner's power, is it still intact? Or has she been compromised in some way? Now, some would say that, well, she's imprisoned, if you will, over in Russia, however literally or figuratively that means. But there are people who have been in really, truly extreme prison-like conditions, but have still maintained their power and kept their identity intact. I'm wondering if that's the case with Brittany. And as I say that, I'm reminded of the women in the field that Wendy Borman comes from in film, feature film, documentary film production, and direction, of all those wonderful women directors. You know, women directors like Anna Boden, who directed one of my favorite films, Captain Marvel, which is a female-starred sci-fi film. I just love that. I'm waiting for the continued story, the saga of Captain Marvel to come out, and it'd be wonderful if Anna was still directing in those episodes. Another one is Angelina Jolie, not just a director, producer, actor, writer, social activist. Goodness gracious, wouldn't I love to have a conversation with her about her power and how to keep it intact, how to share it. And speaking of sharing, was the director Emma Asante, who's also an actor in the films and shows that she's done. And it's interesting to me what has happened through the duress, the challenges that women have had to play in the media. They're not just directing, going after films first. They're taking on anything they can get. A series, a podcast, for crying out loud. I mean, anything to just make a statement about we exist, we are here. And in that existence, we all come from a family. So my last reference to a director is Gail Mancuso, who directed many episodes of Modern Family. And just to be in that position of doing that and still having a sense of humor, because look, just think about it. You come to work knowing that you've been challenged to even get this position, and yet it's one of creating humor and situational comedy and reflecting the realities of the modern family. So Gail, my hat goes off to her and what she's done to get where she's at. But then there's the business, not just entertainment or film, but running a business. Women like Sarah Blakely, who runs, I love this word, Spanx. She's the leader at the company Spanx. Or Lee Von Binder, who is the chief executive officer of Ava. And then there's General Dynamics with Fiva Novakovic. There's also Regal Entertainment. I don't know if you know this, but Regal Entertainment survived because, the pandemic didn't put a lot of butts in seats to watch movies. And Regal Entertainment, because of Amy Miles' creative shifting, dodging bullets, adapting and adjusting under extreme duress, that company has survived, and magnanimously. And then lastly for me, the women in business that have just stood out for me, because Williams-Sonoma is one of my favorite stores. They have more gadgets to help me in the kitchen than I could ever buy. And Laura Alber is the lead person there. Now you'd think, right? You'd think that, well, naturally, a woman should be leading a Williams-Sonoma, right? Because the kitchen. Am I showing my chauvinist side of me? No, I'm not. I'm just pointing out that that's ridiculous. It doesn't make sense that a woman should run it, but it makes sense a woman should run it when you want creativity. You want demonstrative decision-making powers about what's right and that what is accurate, and listening to the voices of the women who are in the kitchen and have made the choice to stay there and maybe become the lead of their own cooking show. So that's why I go with Laura Alber and her role at Williams-Sonoma, because it's one of my favorite shows, or stores. It's one of my all-time favorite stores. Well, one of my all-time favorite people that I met, a few years ago. I don't even want to say how many years ago. But Wendy Borman has been part of my growth as a person, and emphatically as it relates to the show today, as a male person. Because next week when we have our show, we're going to be talking about the role of men in looking at social equality and balancing the scales. We have a role. We need to realize what that role is. So without further ado, I want to introduce you all to the executive producer, director, documentarian, award-winning filmmaker, and friend, Wendy Borman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lowell. And I just want to also give you compliments as well. I know we initially connected about filmmaking, but I also view you as a friend and a mentor. So it's nice that we get to be part of each other's growth.
Yeah. Well, I said this to a few people the other day. I said it's been far too long that we haven't physically got together, because now we can. So I'm looking forward to that moment in the near future, to see you and Chris. It makes me feel good. So tell me a little bit about what's on your project list these days. I know we talked briefly a few weeks ago, but give me the 411 on what's going on.
Yeah, well, just so your audience is aware, we released a documentary called Mary Jane's The Women of Weed, and Lowell is one of my associate producers on that. So that came out of living in Colorado and just looking around and seeing the success that women were having in cannabis. And what was interesting about that is it came out at the festival circuit the same weekend that the Harvey Weinstein story broke in the New York Times, and the Me Too movement had this huge resurgence. The Me Too movement had started over a decade prior, but it really had a groundswell moment then. So fast forward, we, now released the film. It's available out on video on demand and in libraries. And in the middle of the pandemic, I had to wrestle with what happens if the movie industry never comes back. Okay, my films don't necessarily always make it into a movie theater because that's not the best spot to sell tickets for documentaries all the time. However, what happens if film festivals no longer exist because they can't keep up with the funding? What happens if these streaming platforms only want to take series from people they've worked with before? They don't want to, take a risk on somebody else. So that wrestling that I did in the midst of the pandemic, during the reckoning of the summer of 2020, when we were also looking at the inequalities in healthcare and social justice, and we had the whole George Floyd murder that was a groundswell moment again for people to really examine all the dynamics of power in society. And I started looking at how can we bring more consent into the entire creative ecosystem.
Yeah.
There's this role that has become more popular now called intimacy coordinators, and maybe some of your listeners have heard of that before. But basically, it's a role that is an advocate and also a choreographer for the actors on set in intimate moments. So when you think about people when they have to do like stage combat, they have a fight choreographer, right? Because this is trying to keep bodies and people safe. So an intimacy coordinator does something similar. That's great for the actors, and I'm glad that position exists. But there are people up and down the food chain that have input into what happens before the actors even get on set and what happens afterwards.
Yeah.
So just looking at the power dynamics and how can we make things more consensual for everyone. And that also, I think we have a moment to have this conversation because we're already having something called safety meetings on set where you're talking about how do we keep each other safe from COVID. So you're running through things like wear a mask, sanitize your hands, stay 6 feet apart. These are the reminders for everybody. But what we're really talking about there are boundaries. And so if we can talk about boundaries to keep each other physically safe,
Yeah.
we can also talk about maybe there's emotional boundaries, or there are, other kind of physical boundaries in terms of I don't want to show this part of my body, or, I actually have a disability, so I can't lift things above a certain weight. I don't want to get hurt, So saying those things out loud, talking through them, I noticed that when you increase consent, you decrease liability. And that's something that gets everybody's attention.
I want to get into more detail about the intimacy and safety side of things as it relates to the obstacles that pop up, in particular for women. But before I do that, I'm going to be very blatant about promoting Mary Jane Women of Weed. So
Let's do that.
Yeah. So where can people go to connect with Mary Jane, the Women of Weed?
Yes. So Mary Jane's The Women of Weed is a documentary film that's out now. It is available on Amazon, Apple TV, Google Play, Vudu, Vimeo.
Oh, nice.
And there's also a platform called Canopy. So if you have a university or a public library card, you can watch the film using your library card.
Outstanding. Now, let me add to this for everybody. Wendy knows this because it's been part of her life for many years about the educational significance of this documentary. It captures the history that was part of that time frame when she was actually filming it, and the players, the significant leadership, female leadership and players within that. We'll talk more about that female leadership in cannabis in a moment, but that being said, watch it because it's informational, it's educational. And then it's just a darn good movie. It really, it's got all the good things. It's got movement, it's got some humor, it's got some drama, it's well colorized, and the sound is blended nicely. It's got all the key components because that's just what Wendy Borman does as an executive producer and director. So, is that blatant enough promotion? I think it is.
It's really good. I think the only thing we could add is that if you go to maryjanesfilm.com, you can connect with all of the platforms, read some of the blog content,
buy some merch.
Buy merch, see all the film festival laurels we've won.
Exactly. So, wonderful infomercial and focus on being blatantly commercial. I love it. Wouldn't want to be any place else but here. But that being said, give me some insights from you about what are some of the obstacles within those two genres, the intimacy side of things and the safety side of things, as it relates to film production for women. What are they facing? Look, I say this to my son all the time. I've got 4 grandsons, and I tell them all, now that they're old enough to listen, well, I think they listen to me. I say, men are stupid. You need to be overcoming that. You need to be constantly focused on your awareness by listening and seeing what you're doing with people, in particular, girls and women. And they don't always, they're young, so they're emerging. But what are those obstacles that we need to be listening to and aware of?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways to break that down. We can look at things in society, right, where just women having access to careers, and equal pay, like we just had Equal Pay Day the other day, but I will say that's for white women, right? Equal Pay Day for Black, Indigenous, and Latinx women is actually in August. So it takes them that long to earn the same amount of money that the average white man earned the year before, right? So that's an obstacle. We've noticed that more women have left the economy during the pandemic, just based on childcare, or those were the types of careers women had that had the biggest hits, like hospitality, travel, nonprofits, things in the creative professions. If you were lucky enough to be a nurse, you get all the hours, and yet you're coming home exhausted and maybe exposing your family too. And so some of the women have had to step out of those caretaking roles to take care of their own families. So that's the society bucket, right? If we're looking at the film bucket, we still have about 20% of directors for feature-length films, in the top 250 grossing films every single year. So we're talking about the huge blockbusters all the way down to the indie films that, for whatever reason, they hit the cultural zeitgeist and people hear about them, right? The top 250 films, and every year for the last 10 years we've analyzed, and the top percentage is 20% of those have been women. That's our high. So there's some reason women aren't getting the opportunities to direct. We do find that when there's a female producer or a female writer, the entire crew ends up being more diverse. And by diversity, we're talking about gender, we're also talking about race, class, sexual orientation. When women are in charge, we bring more people to the table.
And I want to add this to that comment, Wendy. It's not at a delinquent diminishment of quality. In fact, as you know, I've been on the set. I've watched the process of acquiring the talent, and in fact, the scrutiny to find the talent seems to be higher, and yet the end result is as you just said. So I want to make sure people understand. There's no diminishment of quality here. In fact, it's probably more arduous in the recruitment because they want the high quality and they want everything else. Their expectations are pretty high, which I like.
Mm-hmm. And we know that when teams are more diverse, the company ends up being more successful. So this is true for storytelling. This is true for Fortune 500 companies. It's true for nonprofits. It's true in the military. Like if you have more people bringing their life experiences and their perspectives to a problem,
Mm-hmm.
the problem solving is going to be more creative, and the outcome is going to be more successful.
So with your descriptions there, let me add the Mindset Moment quote that I have every week, and this one's from Alice Walker, because it's apropos to handling these obstacles. And she says the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. So what you just said, culturally, you're giving them an environment that says, let's cherish your power. Let's appreciate your differences and give you that confidence to really excel. What have been some of the mentors that you have worked with that allowed you to get to that place, that created cultures like that?
Well, I would say my mentors, they come from a variety of different industries. They're not just filmmakers, and they're not all women. I have men and women who I learn things from. I think there are people I admire. I unfortunately have not met them in person, but I consider them a mentor, just based on how they lead their companies and how they talk about their work. Ava DuVernay is hugely inspiring. She's a director, producer, and in addition to doing, projects that end up on Netflix and in movie theaters and on different cable platforms, she also educates her community about filmmaking. And she connected all of the Black film festivals around the United States into a cohort so that they can support other films by Black filmmakers. So instead of viewing each other as competition, she brought everybody together and said, we'll all succeed if we work together.
Do people like that, Wendy, do people like that and their stories, in addition to what they do for you or with you or how they influenced you in their accomplishments, but I just know her story is extremely interesting. I mean, if you didn't know anything but how she got where she's at and the things she's gone through in discovering her power, facing the struggles, adjusting that stuff, I mean, that in itself is motivating.
Yeah, she'll have a biopic at some point.
Yeah.
She's a fascinating woman. But to bring it back to your quote, your Alice Walker quote, it's been really interesting to hear how the conversation about power has shifted.
Mm-hmm.
When we think of power, we think about usually as power over.
Yeah.
Somebody's oppressing somebody else.
Getting privilege over somebody.
And we think about it as a zero-sum game, right? Like if I gain power, somebody else has to lose power. Like we view it as a finite resource. And that's not necessarily true because of synergy, right? So instead of just thinking about it as power over, there's the power with. If you and I work together, we can actually achieve more. And then there's the way to think about the power to. So what do we want our power to do?
Mm-hmm.
Do we have the power to, help the community? Do we have the power to create a film? Do we have the power to, help get refugees out of Ukraine? We have more power together. And then when we work together, we can actually achieve great results. So no matter how you think about power, we all have it, and we decide where we put it.
Now, you knew this statistic early on, and I'm wondering if it's changed, and if it has changed, what are the influences? 37% of women, 37% of the cannabis owners are women. They control the business. In fact, many of them started it from 15 years ago when it became a licensed entity. And the research, and so that 37% is a real number historically. But is there pressure for it to change, going up? Is it stale, or is it going down, being depressed because men are being the typical assholes they typically are? And I can say that because this is like cable here. I won't even edit that.
It's not a PG-13.
No. So I'm just wondering, because you maintain connection with the Pufferjettes. That's the group that Wendy labeled as kind of her cadre of folks, the Pufferjettes. But you keep in touch with them. What's the feeling about that 37%?
Yeah. So for the folks that are unfamiliar with the cannabis industry, I realized back in 2015 that there was this statistic that said, 37% of senior leadership in the cannabis industry was women. This figure came out by a media company called MJ Biz Daily. And so as we unpack how they came to that number, we realized, well, maybe that's not actually the number, but because it was a self-reported survey.
Yeah.
So whoever took the survey, let us know. They've since put out other studies, but there's currently no national registry of all the cannabis companies for us to go reach out to and say, hey, how many women do you have in your company?
Yeah,
So how we get to that number, there's some questions about. I think anecdotally, what we can see is that from the time I started working on the Mary Jane's documentary until the time it's now available now, we've actually seen a decrease in women's leadership in cannabis. And I think initially women came to the cannabis industry because they were attracted to, building something new and fixing the problems that they saw in other industries. And women are smart. Like, they see the same opportunities men do, and they say, wait, I can create some good. I can help my community, and we might be able to make billions of dollars. Like, let's do this. This is easy. And so, as you would expect in history, because this seems to happen, so recently we saw the technology industry, like, women actually created coding. How we program computers, women created that. How many women are in the technology industry today? About 20%. And so we look at cannabis and we say, how many women leaders are there in cannabis? And guess what? There's about 20%. We look at the film industry for film directors, it's about 20%. So somehow, some people have decided that, that feels diverse enough for us. 20% feels good. We'll have 80 over here and 20 here. It's the 80-20 rule. Like, that's enough, right? And I'll say it's not enough.
Yeah, I want to talk to you more in detail about the movement to push the 20 up and shift it so that there's some equality standards applied. And we'll do that after I share with you something extraordinary. Extraordinary. So when you wake up in the morning and you're thinking about, okay, what's going to get me going? What's kind of spicy and gives me a sweet feeling about myself? Do you think about a Ziggy coffee? Ziggy coffee in your area. Now, we've got Ziggy coffee here because it started in Longmont, Colorado, and is now headquarters located in Meade. And I was just blessed with the opportunity to feature one of the women owners, Taffy Nichols, of a Ziggy Coffee. She's the new franchise owner of a Ziggy Coffee in Broomfield, Colorado, at the northeast corner of Sheridan and 120th. Now, I know that's going to be a tough commute for you, Wendy, but nonetheless, there are Ziggy's on the West Coast. So if you're at a Ziggy's, I want you to try this. I want you to go there and try their Mango Blast. It's a Red Bull infused cold drink, iced drink, that is their new flavor special for this month. It's a great month to have it in March with Women History Month. So if you're like me and you're a coffee drinker, get your Mango Blast infused with Red Bull, and then get your sidecar caffeine fix, and just have a great day. Ziggy's Coffee. I love it. We're gonna do a little bit of a test, if you will. So if you go to Ziggy's and you get anything, not just the Mango Blast, just make sure you mention KUHS when you order. If you do that, you'll get a special surprise. Wendy, Yeah, a special surprise. And they're doing some wonderful things. They're very creative, very nutritional focused with whether you're vegan or gluten-free and local vendors for every store. The franchise is not doing like a lot of franchises do. They can do national accounts. So if you're in Oregon and it was headquartered in Ohio, you're going to get Ohio branded stuff in Oregon. They are very local-based orientation to support all small businesses and entrepreneurs. But Taffy Nichols is my newfound friend and a business leader at Ziggy's here in Broomfield. Now, where we ended off, Wendy, was about the power struggles within the industry and the 20%. Come on, you know, I hate to say it this way, but I want to give the impact to our audience that I believe the forces are at work. Those masculine knuckleheads are at work, and they don't even know it because we've been socialized into this framework of thinking about where's the woman's place. And so that to me is an obstacle for women, from my masculine viewpoint, trying to get in touch with my feminine side. So I'm wondering, is it easier for you to relate to an injured elephant or a male venture capital executive? Which is more difficult to manage?
Well, just to give folks the context of the elephant, so one of my previous documentaries was about elephants who stepped on landmines in Thailand, and there's an elephant hospital that builds prosthetics to help them walk again. So that film actually came out 10 years ago in April. So that's called The Eyes of Thailand. All right, so injured elephants or venture capitalists. I'm going to say it's easier for me to relate to the injured elephant because they don't underestimate me like the male venture capitalists. You know, I've had enough fundraising conversations with VCs and, you know, people just not VCs, like high net worth individuals who are trying to figure out where to put their money, right? So it's an intriguing idea for people to think about investing in a film, and yet they consistently underestimate me because I'm a female.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be the person at the top. It's been really interesting. I've had like the office assistant or, you know, like the production assistant second guess me in meetings, and it's like, who is this person? Is he allowed to talk? You know, like, why is this okay? And there's something about the power over mindset, you know, this hierarchy that I think is linked to masculinity and how men relate to each other. And I've heard that from people in different cultures as well. There's this idea of, you know, men or the masculine energy makes relationships up and down, whereas female energy, feminine energy, makes relationships horizontally. So they're building a collective of peers that are around, you know, same point in life stage, same level in their careers, things like that. But we don't necessarily relate up and down as easily.
Yeah.
Whereas men, I think, are trying to find out where am I in the pecking order. And unfortunately, that can get pretty toxic in that the way you get to the top is you push other people down.
Yeah, and I want to add, Wendy, where I'm going with it with my male athletes, my male executives, I talk to them about a spherical mindset. You're looking at a spherical thing, and you're talking about working on circles, and every circle you create goes to your creation of your sphere of influence, which is not a new term, that's an older term. But they create this sphere of sphere of thinking so that they include everyone, and they have appreciation for differences. But within that, we need to socially educate. We've been socialized, men have been socialized into this hierarchical thinking process that's up and down, not spherical, not even aspects on one plane multilaterally. And I want to educate young men as soon as possible. But there's also discovery for me that there are women who, because of the way they thought they had to fight the battle of discovering their power, they got in touch, deeply in touch with their masculine side. I mean, to the point where a senior executive here in Colorado said to me, "Don't worry about it, I'm like a guy anyway." I mean, she was like really relating to it, and I go, that's sad. Who are you? Where are you? I want to know you. I don't want to know, I mean, I do and I don't, discover the female that had to adapt. I want to know the true, unencumbered, just who you are. So my next question for you is about the educational process and what you want women to know about the methods for discovering their power. What do they need to know differently, and what kind of things do they need to just get rid of, cut loose of that?
Yeah, I love this idea of having a sphere of influence, particularly if we're thinking about this in terms of, physics, geometry, science, this idea. Because if you think of a Jenga tower, that's up and down. That's hierarchy, right? You are taking something out and trying to put it on top. At some point, it falls down.
Yeah.
Right? And if you're looking at something that's very flat, like a plate or, something, you have to, piece of paper, it can't go anywhere, It might be able to, float a little bit in the air, but, it's going to be affected by gravity, and it needs something to bunch it all together, turn it into a paper ball, or fold it into an airplane, and go somewhere, right? So, a sphere is a wheel that can move in all directions. So I love this idea visually. I'm going to link it to story because I think that's where we get these cultural narratives, right? We have these cultural tropes. And until we see different types of leaders, until we see a different type of masculine leader and a different type of feminine leader, I think we get stuck in thinking we have to get rid of this feminine side of ourselves, no matter what gender we are, in order to succeed, because we only see leadership as male, right? Yeah. And that's why Gina Davis was so revolutionary when she was commander-in-chief. That was the first time we saw a female president, and it was mind-blowing for people. Like, we didn't think it would happen.
Yeah.
And she says, if you can see it, you can be it. So if we start to see different types of leaders succeeding, that then gives the people behind us something to shoot for. And they say, I can be like her when I grow up. And there's no reason why a man can't look at a female leader and go, I want to be like her when I grow up. Because women do it to men all the time. I want to be like him when I grow up.
Well, it's interesting. I'll take you back to the discussion of the difference between spherical and planal, like a piece of paper, right? If we were to write down the things that women leaders who have been very successful have done on a piece of paper without their name on it, and gave it to a group of mixed genders, sexual preferences, ethnicity, whatever, and put it in the room, they would say, oh, those are admirable traits. Oh, I think I'd like to do that. And then we string it on them and say, well, that was a woman who did that. The men in the room would probably go, what? What? So I totally agree with you, but we've got to train people out of that presumptive positioning of their mindset. That it's not about that one-dimensional look of the female. It's sexuality doesn't have a lot to do with the quality of the outcome. It may influence it in different ways, but it doesn't necessarily determine it. Good quality stuff is good quality stuff. Mm-hmm. Practice those fundamentals and train as such. Now, I want to ask you then, women have been categorized as, young lady, when you want to be a ski jumper, that's very dangerous. Men can handle it. You shouldn't be a ski jumper. Oh, and you know what? ski crossing, ladies, is really fast and really quick changes and really you have to be strong. I'm not so sure we want to take on that risk. Now that's from the U.S. ski team, right? There are excuses to women about physicality. I'm going to generalize it into obstacles. What are some of the obstacles you are still facing that are directly related to your presence as a woman, physically, cognitively, all the elements that you get evaluated by? What are some of the obstacles that are still in your way that men need just to get a clue?
Yeah, for me, I've mentioned it before, being underestimated.
Yep.
You know, having to constantly prove the credentials are mine. You know, you can have quite a resume, but if somebody's like, I don't know if she's quite right, you know, it's a culture fit, you know, that we're looking for. What they're really saying is we're not willing to do the work to help people feel welcome here. So underestimating it is one thing. I think, you know, misconceptions just about what type of leader I might be. You know, if they've had only, if it's, I don't want a school marm, you know, kind of mindset, it's like, well, then you haven't met me because that's not my energy, that's not how I lead. But if that's what you have that stereotype in your head, then you're gonna, you know, not want to work with me because of my gender. But you'll, again, talk about, oh, the tone of her voice, or, you know, like, they'll come up with all these other excuses to, again, say they're not willing to do the work. I think the biggest one for me is funding for projects.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's that saying that women and people of color have to do twice as much work to get half as far. And that's just to exist in the world, you know, because we have all these other obstacles. But then when we do get there, we're not given the amount of funding. Like, I just saw in some of the interviews about the new Pixar movie, Turning Red, that came out. It had a female creative team, female protagonists in the film. It had a lot of really great things, and one of the standout quotes was by a man saying, gosh, and it was just the most efficient film we've ever had. I think we could learn a lot from him. And my takeaway was like, efficient, meaning you didn't give him as much money and then got it done in half the time.
Yeah.
Which is probably true. You know, Chloe Zhao talked about this too in her acceptance speeches the other year for her film Nomadland. She was like, fund women, pay women. Like, if you were going to give a white man $100 million to make a movie, give a woman or a person of color $100 million to make that same movie.
Do women funders need to have that answer for themselves as well? Because I'm seeing some hesitation on philanthropic, you know, high net worth women not doing it for the exact same reasons.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You know, I was lucky in the Mary Jane's documentary. We had pretty much an equal balance of the funders for the film between men and women. And we also had some married couples, you know, jointly decide to come in on things. So they saw the value of the film. So I think it really depends on the risk tolerance, is how I'll phrase it. Because men and women have different levels of risk. And for women, money carries different risks for them. You know, number one, we're going to earn less over our lifetimes. We're going to take more career gaps. You know, we're going to have to take care of more people in our families.
Yeah.
So the money that they do have, like, where do they want to put it? And there are some women who just, you know, underestimate themselves, and or they are relying on, you know, financial advisors who may have a difference of opinion as to where they should put their money. And so it just comes down to education. But I would say, though, that if we look at gender only, women end up donating more of their income throughout their lifetime to charitable causes than men. So the opportunity there is to create something that's a social impact.
So with that being said then, Wendy, in the few minutes we have left, I want to ask you about mental health is a big issue, because in coping with all of the things we've just discussed with women, I mean, I'm not going to discount men, but we're talking about the power of women today and making choices. So you have all the things you mentioned, gaps in career, taking care of a lot more people, getting less and doing more. Getting the less is the money, and yet doing more and delivering the high quality and the returns, that can weigh on one's shoulders and their minds. What have been some go-to coping mechanisms for you in dealing with all of those slices of the sphere that you control?
I would say exercise has been, part of my entire life. Like I remember taking dance classes when I was 2 years old and gymnastics by the time I was 4, and so movement has been really important. So sometimes that's, cardio and strength training, but a lot of times it's yoga. Mindfulness, meditation is something that I came to, after I found yoga. That's been really helpful. Through the pandemic, it has been long walks. Just getting out in nature, not necessarily having a destination. And it's amazing because depending on my stress level, it sometimes takes me longer to get to that point where I'm not just running through the to-do list and I'm actually enjoying the nature part of the walk.
So under what conditions do you take the walk by yourself versus with someone else?
Well, I try to schedule a walk in the middle of my workday every day.
So that's
just as my mental health. Yeah.
That's a by yourself thing. Gotcha.
Yeah. And sometimes it's I'm listening to a podcast. Sometimes I'm just, out walking. But I try to do a 20 to 30 minute walk on my own every day. And